I had an introduction from somebody to Basil Wright, who made some very good films, documentary films, one about Ceylon in those days, Sri Lanka now. And he was very kind, and he said, a very small company, we only have 3 people here. I haven't got work for you. Why don't you go and see Paul Rother? And I did. I showed Paul my album of mainly the Charing Cross Road, because my father was a bookseller and publisher. So I was interested in a street full of bookshops. But I couldn't find a publisher then. In those days it was expensive to print illustrated books. But my photographs still survive after 30s in Charing Cross Road. And Rother looked at my photographs and he said, oh, they're very nice pictures. If you want to learn something, I can make you assistant to a young man who is making a series of zoo films. And that was, of course, up my street. I was interested in zoology. And I showed them to Julian Huxley, who liked them very much, and he gave me all facilities, or gave Rother all facilities to work with keepers and go close to the cages beyond the barrier, to put my lens through bars to make them look less like a zoo, the photographs I mean. So that's how I started in films.
I'm curious at this point in time, because a lot of the people that you knew, like Paul Rother, were instrumental in the creation of what was then the British Film Academy and later became BAFTA. Do you have any recollections of what the attitude within the British Film Academy and the British film landscape generally was towards documentary as opposed to narrative films?
Well, it wasn't easy for people who had worked in documentary to get a feature film for the cinema, only if the documentaries looked good, of course. But Rother wanted to do 1 or 2 feature films for his own reputation, I suppose. And the first one we did was about occasional workers on farms. In the harvest time, they went from one farm to another and asked whether they could help with the harvest. And it was called No Resting Place.
Did you find it much of a challenge as you moved more and more into making features?
Yes, it is quite a challenge. But usually the actors were very good. They knew their lines and they were helpful. One somehow falls into it. from documentary into feature.
You're someone who has consistently, throughout the whole of your career, continued to make documentaries. Why was that?
Well, documentaries were for me, as they stated in their little magazine they published, that they want to make films which are useful to society. And that attracted me because I was brought up that the society is a very important thing to work for.
It's quite interesting to look at all these films as a whole that you've worked on, that it builds a very particular portrait of Britain and Britain through the decades.
Well, I'm very glad you said that, because I was not aware that I record Britain in its present state at times when I made a film. It was always more in documentaries, and television has taken up the documentary side too and made better documentaries than the cinema people did, like Kathy Come Home and others were very, very good pictures of society at the moment when they made it.
And again, this is something that you've referred to a few times. Social issues remain something to the core, not just of your documentary work, but also in your photography, of sort of capturing the essence of life.
Yes, indeed. I grew up as a socialist and still am. It was always important in my life to help society as a whole, not only individuals. That's really all I can say about that. It's something in me that my father had the first socialist bookshop in Vienna, in a working class district.
It's interesting when you think about the documentary films that you were involved in. It almost feels like the urgency and the politics of and the interest in society of the Italian neo-realist films is there, but the artistry, it's almost drawing on Renoir and the very poetic filmmakers of France in the 1930s. They seem to come together in many of these films by Rother, by Harry Watt and other filmmakers and Jennings to create this, it's an almost poetic kind of documentary filmmaking that you're involved with.
That is true, and I'm not ashamed of it. Also in my photography, I always try to get a picture which has some aesthetic interest as well as a record of a fact.
What was it like to receive a tribute from your peers and the people that you've worked with over decades?
Well, it was a wonderful experience. There were about 400 people in the National Film Theatre. At the end, they all got up and sang "He's a Jolly Good Fellow," which was very touching for me that so many of my fellow film workers thought that I was worth a tribute at my 100th birthday.
Wolfgang Suschitzky, thank you very much indeed.
You're most welcome.
So when I got the audition and wanted to go into show business, my mother said, I bring all you to educate. I bring all you to England to educate all you. And you're going to go singing and dancing in show business? No way. You're going to have a proper job.
We had got to do something about changing the image of our industry, both film and television.